Hi BookTube! I'm here today with the second video in my genre exploration series, and today I would like to talk to you about postmodernism. So what is postmodernism? That is a small question with a huge answer. Generally, postmodern is seen as kind of the retaliation against, but also a product of modernism. And the ideas of high and lowbrow that were perpetuated by the authors of that era, and that the idea, it also is like rebelling against the idea that we are improving and progressing as a culture. It's post-World War II era. Even though there are some books from before World War II that may be classified as postmodernism, but generally think about it as books that have been written after World War II. Umberto Eco, who's a postmodernist author, he says that postmodernism is a way of operating. It is the use of a series of techniques in writing that reflect self-awareness and rebels against the conventions of order, and they celebrate incoherence and confusion. So you are aware of your work and you work within it, but you also rebel against our society. You recognize that simulations have kind of replaced reality and that books are simulations. Postmodernism started in the informational age, and we have now progressed through to the internet age, and I'm going to quote David Foster Wallace, who is a great postmodernist, here. So we are products of more than just one region, heritage, and theory, and citizens of a culture that said its most important stuff about itself via mass media. There's a slew of techniques, but I kind of picked out what I believe are the 7 most important ones, and I'm just going to talk about those because I think that's what constructs postmodernism, is the different techniques used in it. The first is metafiction. These are methods the author uses to make the reader more aware of the fact that they are actually reading a book. It makes readers active participants in the story as opposed to just passive observers. It's the construction of the novel where you are aware of the words and the story, the way it looks on the page, the way it was made, etc., etc. I think the best example of this is House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danilewski, where you are reading about a person reading a book about a person watching a film, about people making a film. So it's, you know, like this huge inception, you know? And if you also look at the words on the page of House of Leaves, you can see that they really call attention to the fact that they are words on a page, right? The second thing is temporal distortion. This is done in many ways, but 2 of the major ways are in like a non-linear format, so that means you're jumping back and forth in time. And the second one is through anachronistic references, which means that you are referencing things, ideas, inventions, etc. that kind of haven't occurred in the time era that you're writing in yet. And the example I'm going to give you here is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, where we see the main character Billy Pilgrim, who literally gets unstuck in time, which means that he transports from the future, where he's on a different planet because it's the future, and then back in time to where he's a soldier in Dresden during World War II. Yes. The next thing, the third thing, is kind of the contradictory elements that we see within postmodernism, and that's maximalism and minimalism. So first of all, maximalism is my favorite. I love maximalist books. They kind of, I feel like they encapsulate human nature because we are not alone, we are not solitary beings. Even if you are, you know, you do retreat yourself, you are being affected by society. It goes against this idea of solipsism, where it thinks that, you know, I'm the only mind that exists. It's like, no, there's a lot going on. So I think these novels really try to include a lot. That's why they're called maximalist. There's a lot of digressions, there's footnotes, and what some may deem unnecessary information. But what it does is kind of takes all these characters, especially, and gives them backstories, gives them an action, gives them, you know, some meaning, instead of just following one character, say, throughout it or so. I think the best example of a maximalist novel is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, which is a massive book. There's like 100 pages of endnotes. You get to know all the characters very well, and you know, you get to know a lot about the society that it takes place in. And then on the other end of the spectrum is minimalism. This is where the author may economize even their words. They really depend on the reader to create the story instead of just reacting to the story. So in some cases you may just be like taken and just plopped down in the middle of events and not know what's going on and not really have a lot explained to you, and you kind of have to come up with it yourself. I think a really good example of this is the play Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett, where you're kind of dropped into the situation, you don't really know what's going on, you aren't given a lot of information, you're just kind of like, okay. Thing the fourth is humor. This is seen in a lot of postmodern literature. You get a lot of pulp culture references, you get a lot of puns. I think one of the main ways that they use humor is in the tragicomedy, where they kind of treat serious subjects with humor, and it's a way of dealing with the atrocities of World War II and the world after World War II and the wars that occurred after. So we, you know, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, we have both the Iraqi wars and the war in Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of, you know, atrocious when you think about it, but you've kind of put that humor spin on it as a way of dealing with it. And a good example of this is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. The fifth thing is fragmentation. So this is the use of kind of the incompleteness. Incomplete sentences, dropped plot lines, incomplete characterization. And this is kind of representative of the chaos of real life, because you know, we don't always complete our sentences. We don't always follow plot lines in our life right through to the end. You know, sometimes we give up or things happen and they don't continue, you know. This is, you know, representative of real life. And a good example of this is If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino, where you get 10 separate but unfinished novels. The sixth is Pistache, which is fun to say, Pistache. And this is kind of recognizing that everything's been done before, that we live in a world where it's hard to create something new. And therefore you should blatantly use these styles, these plots, these characters, etc. from past works. Some may parody them, some may use them in interesting ways. So for example, in Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, he calls upon all the different like tropes and characterizations and writing styles of different genres, and then uses them to create something new. And the last thing, the seventh thing, is this idea of paranoia. That, you know, you have to disrupt and distrust the system and fight the man. And one of the ways that they really do this, especially to the reader, they want you to be paranoid and distrust the system of writing, is by providing you with unreliable narrators. So I think a good example of this is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. As you can see, the different examples I'm using are all from different other genres, kind of. So we've got like science fiction and literary fiction and plays and all this kind of stuff, but they all kind of mush together into this postmodern idea. So we have that idea of paranoia and do androids dream of electric sheep? You know, am I an android? Is she an android? Is life what it is? You know, does this idea that we can control this this system by, you know, having these questions and this stuff set up, is it actually working? Kind of idea. Yeah, so those are the 7 major techniques that I want to talk to you about in regards to postmodernism. And now I'm going to give you some examples aside from what I previously used. One that's big on BookTube, or was big a little while ago, was S, where you have like an actual text and then you have in the margins people talking about that text. So that's an example of metafiction there. And then Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov, where you have a man doing commentary on a piece of poetry, but you get like, you know, you get the poetry and then you get the separate stories kind of in the footnotes. It's really kind of very interestingly done. A book that I read recently that really kind of fits into this whole idea of humor and tragicomedy is called Satan, His Psychotherapy and Cure by the Unfortunate Dr. Kassler, JSPS, which has Satan come to Earth as a computer and seeks out psychotherapy to deal with his relationship with God. Kind of an absurd concept, takes this idea of Satan, you know, the master of evil, and kind of puts a humorous spin on it, right? And lastly, Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon is one of the great postmodern classics that everyone should read. And that's it. If you can think of anything else that has to do with postmodernism or any recommendations or anything, let's start talking about it in the comments section down below. And that's all, folks. Goodbye. It's a blah, 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 blah.